Hi, and welcome back to another devlog. This time we're gonna talk about animations, frogs, and we're also gonna break down this swamp scene we got here. We kind of do have animations already, but I specifically wanted to implement sprite sheet animations. They're also called flipbook animations because they function in the exact same way as a flipbook. You have a sequence of separate images, and if you flip through them fast enough, you get the illusion of motion. How this works in code is that I create a texture containing all of the different frames equally spaced apart. I tell the program how many rows and columns there are, the full texture size, and also how large I want an individual frame to be. I can then use that information to find out what piece of the texture should be rendered based on a frame number. When the frame number reaches the last frame, we usually have three choices. Do we loop? In that case, we set the current frame back to the first. Do we ping pong? It's a strange term, but it does what it says. It simply changes direction whenever it hits the start or the end frame and bounces back and forth. So it's a loop, but it's a bouncy loop. And last but not least, we can choose to do nothing, which will result in the animation showing the last frame after it's completed. This is usually called a one-shot animation. In the rendering framework, I have support for all three, but for now I only have looping whilst animating from Lua. For this task I decided to create a swamp scene, just so I could have something else to look at for a while. It's also becoming very difficult to make thumbnails using the same assets over and over. Now, there are a few things going on in this scene. The most obvious being that we are playing as a frog. The player uses sprite sheet animations for its visuals, but is also used for its movement. While the player is idling, we reset the current frame of the animation and we don't update it. If we start moving, the animation updates and we draw it on top of the player. However, what we also do is we check if the animation is at a certain frame. Specifically, we check if the animation is at the jumping stage, and if it is, we set the movement speed to 4. Otherwise, we set it to 0. And this gives the effect that the frog is jumping while you hold the forward button, since you gain a burst of speed every time he's jumping in the animation. Another use of the animations are for visual effects, such as splashes and ripples. These ones are created from a Lua module that plays an animation and then removes it once it's finished. I've added them to the lily pads, the frog, and the pond itself to give the illusion that some flies or fish are disturbing the water surface. The lily pads are just entities with a non-collidable physics body, a texture, and a script that pushes it away and creates ripples if something bumps into it. To create and use an animation in a script, we start by creating a new animation object. We then assign the texture name, as well as setting the amount of rows and columns the texture contains. We then set the size of the complete animation region, and having this allows us to pick out a certain piece of animation from a file containing multiple. We then also set how fast we want the animation to play. To render the animation, we insert a time, which returns a sprite object for us to use and render. Also, something you may have noticed is that when we are in the pond, the frog's head is actually above the surface. To achieve that, I make sure that the frog itself is drawn first. We then draw the pond above the frog, and then we draw the frog's head above the pond. It's very simple, but I think it adds a lot. And I think this is most likely how we will render creatures in the final game, by separating the head, torso and legs into different layers. I also created a fly script that spawns and updates each one of these little guys. They simply add a random bit of rotation and height each frame, and if they fly too far away, they fly back towards the respawn point. They have nothing to do with animation, but I thought it was a nice and quick touch of detail to add. To some of you, this might look like a huge waste of time since it doesn't really have anything to do with tower defense. But again, making these smaller scenes or games are a great way to find these basic missing functionalities that you will need in the future, as well as helping you squash bugs while the game is still small and easily mannered. Ooh, I got a package. I also wanted animations to be in the game for the multiplayer updates, since that is something I will have to try and synchronize between the clients. This video took quite a while to make due to sickness and my day job requiring more attention than usual, and even though it looks like not much was accomplished, a lot of things behind the scenes in the codebase has been extended and improved. Multiplayer is still in the work, and I think that when it's finished, it's gonna be a very interesting video to watch. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon.